And let's cut across to the MEA press conference.
Bangles and bindi, as well as a change in attire that was not warranted by security. The mother of Sri Jadhav was prevented from talking in their mother tongue, although this was clearly the natural medium of communication. She was repeatedly interrupted while doing so and eventually prevented from proceeding further in this regard. Deputy High Commissioner was initially separated from family members who were taken to the meeting without informing him. The meeting was started without his presence, and he could join only after pressing the matter with concerned officials. Even then, he was kept behind an additional partition that did not allow him access to the meeting as agreed. For some inexplicable reason, despite her repeated requests, the shoes of the wife of Sri Jadhav were not returned to her after the meeting. We would caution against any mischievous intent in this regard. From the feedback we have received of the meeting, it appears that Sri Jadhav was under considerable stress and is speaking in an atmosphere of coercion. Most of his remarks were clearly tutored and designed to perpetuate the false narrative of his alleged activities in Pakistan. His appearance also raises questions of his health and well-being. We also regret that, contrary to assurances, the overall atmosphere of the meeting was intimidating insofar as family members were concerned. Family members, however, handled the situation with great courage and fortitude. The manner in which the meeting was conducted and its aftermath was clearly an attempt to bolster a false and unsubstantiated narrative of Sri Jadhav's alleged activities. You would all agree that this exercise lacked any credibility.
So, this is a detailed press release. This is in response. This is in response to the press conference which took place in Pakistan yesterday. All the details have been elucidated by the Indian Foreign Office as to what happened, how the women were harassed there, how they were asked to take off, despite cultural sensitivity, bindi, bangles, and Mangal Sutra. They were asked to change their attire. They were interrupted. She could not speak to her son in her mother tongue. Most important of all, the shoes of the wife of Kulbhushan Jadhav were not returned to her after the meeting. We would caution against any mischievous intent in this regard. Let's rip in again.
In a manner which violated the letter and spirit of our understandings. This included the Pakistani press was allowed on multiple occasions to approach family members closely, harass and hector them, and hurt false and motivated accusations about Sri Jadhav. This was despite a clear agreement that the media would not be allowed close access. Under the pretext of security precautions, the cultural and religious sensibilities of family members were disregarded. This included removal of Mangal Sutra, bangles and bindi, as well as a change in attire that was not warranted by security. The mother of Sri Jadhav was prevented from talking in their mother tongue, although this was clearly the natural medium of communication. She was repeatedly interrupted while doing so and eventually prevented from proceeding further in this regard. Deputy High Commissioner was initially separated from family members who were taken to the meeting without informing him. The meeting was started without his presence, and he could join only after pressing the matter with concerned officials. Even then, he was kept behind an additional partition that did not allow him access to the meeting as agreed. For some inexplicable reason, despite her repeated requests, the shoes of the wife of Sri Jadhav were not returned to her after the meeting. We would caution against any mischievous intent in this regard. From the feedback we have received of the meeting, it appears that Sri Jadhav was under considerable stress and is speaking in an atmosphere of coercion. Most of his remarks were clearly tutored and designed to perpetuate the false narrative of his alleged activities in Pakistan. His appearance also raises questions of his health and well-being. We also regret that, contrary to assurances, the overall atmosphere of the meeting was intimidating insofar as family members were concerned. Family members, however, handled the situation with great courage and fortitude. The manner in which the meeting was conducted and its aftermath was clearly an attempt to bolster a false and unsubstantiated narrative of Sri Jadhav's alleged activities. You would all agree that this exercise lacked any credibility.
So a number of things happened. JP Singh, there was an additional partition behind which JP Singh was standing. The women were asked to take off their Mangal Sutra, they were asked to take off their bindi, bangles. Jadhav's wife was not allowed to, she was not given back her shoes. And then India has very categorically said that it looks very, very suspicious as to what Pakistan intends to do. Secondly, India says it was in violation of the spirit. And it says that the press was allowed on multiple occasions to approach the family, harass them, and ask uncomfortable questions. Cultural and religious sensibilities of the family members was disregarded. Mother was prevented from talking in their mother tongue. Deputy High Commissioner was separated from the family members who were taken to the meeting without informing him. The meeting was started without his presence and could only join after pressing the matter with the concerned officials. Even then he was kept behind additional partition that did not allow him access to the meeting as agreed. For some inexplicable reason, despite the repeated requests, the shoes of wife of Sri Jadhav were not returned to her after the meeting, and this is very suspicious. And now I'm joined by my senior colleague Surya Gangadharan from the newsroom. Surya, what do you make of this detailed press conference and the fact that even if I leave aside the religious and cultural issue of sensibility, taking off Mangal Sutra, bindi, not even returning the shoe?
Well, it's a sad testimony to India-Pak relations, Karthikeya. I think more than anything else, it tells you how far apart the two countries have drifted in the last 70 odd years. But coming to the Jadhav case, I think more than anything else, one gets the impression that there's a lot of paranoia perhaps among the Pakistani establishment about this meeting, perhaps a concern, a fear, a worry maybe on the Pakistani side that inadvertently the family could perhaps reveal details of Jadhav's incarceration, of the treatment he's been given. Therefore, you had a screen placed before them, and you had no direct contact except through a small telephone. Again, the duration of the entire conversation was pretty short, about half an hour, perhaps 40 odd minutes, not more than that. So there are so many indications here of Pakistani paranoia. I mean, there's a very strong word to use, but this is how one can describe the manner in which the Pakistanis have treated this family.
But then, if I go point by point on this issue, what explains the fact that the meeting took place without informing JP Singh, the Deputy High Commissioner there, and while he was in another room and the suddenly meeting started? Is this possible?
No, there are clearly protocols to be followed, and in this case, perhaps deliberately, the Pakistanis decided to ignore it or bring in JP Singh much later, when much of the conversation had already taken place. Perhaps they didn't want JP Singh to have exchange words with Jadhav. Perhaps they were feared that Jadhav would disclose the manner of his treatment there and how he was perhaps kidnapped from Iran, brought to Balochistan, and what kind of questions were posed to him, the nature of his trial, for instance. The Indian High Commission has not received until date a copy of the charge sheet and the entire trial process that was carried out in a military court. So these are all perhaps indications that the Pakistanis wanted to limit the duration of this entire exercise and keep the Indian diplomats out of it as long as possible.
But then, even if they wanted, they have made a PR stunt out of it, there is no doubt about it. But then why would they do things which would make the people who have gone there very, very uncomfortable, to interrupt a person who probably knows only Hindi and Marathi?
I think that is also deliberate, Perhaps there was an intention to make things difficult for the family, try and humiliate them in a way by making them take off their, Mangal Sutra and rings and other stuff, making them change their shoes, making them even change their clothes. I think there's an element of an attempt to try and humiliate them, to try and, give the Pakistanis a psychological build-up against the family, perhaps put pressure on them in some way. I recall some of my earlier visits to Pakistan many years ago, when this kind of psychological tactic will start as you get down from the aircraft and enter the airport. From there itself, the harassment would start. So what I read now from the in MEA's briefing recalls those kind of tactics that the Pakistani used to employ.
Surya, last question to you before I let go of you. You're talking about harassment, but what is really very inexplicable is that in India, in its press note, very categorically said that we had sought a meeting for a consular access, and it came on the pretext of on the humanitarian ground. So, will it be correct on my part to say that they just did it to ward off some public criticism before the next hearing of the ICJ?
I don't think it's so much the ICJ as the concern about how Pakistan is being perceived in certain world capitals, especially the US. There's a lot of pressure being mounted on Pakistan on the issue of terror sanctuaries, on the support of terror groups. And this case of Jadhav has also somewhere or the other made its appearance in the media in the West. So I think at some level the Pakistanis needed to bring down some of those concerns that are being voiced by various groups, not just in India, even those worldwide. Some of the international human rights groups have expressed concern over the manner in which Jadhav has been treated. So I think this entire meeting was perhaps an effort to meet some of those concerns, to reassure them that Pakistan is going some way towards, meeting those concerns. But the fact remains that Pakistan has made various representations to the ICJ very recently, indicating that as far as national security issues are concerned, cases like Jadhav will not figure under the ICJ's jurisdiction. So I think we can see a deliberate effort being made by the Pakistanis to ensure that whatever the verdict in the ICJ, they will proceed with their own view on how to deal with Jadhav.
Thank you, Surya, for this update. And let me go across to my colleague Khalid, who joins me, who has been following the Jadhav family. So, finally, the meetings are over, or are they still taking place in the Ministry of External Affairs, Khalid?
Well, yes, the meetings seem to be over now as the statement has come forward. We saw earlier in the morning a very high-profile meeting happened at Sushma Swaraj's residence, where Jadhav family met Sushma Swaraj along with top brass of Ministry of External Affairs, which included Foreign Secretary F. Jaishankar. And immediately after that, the family went out of the residence. We were told that there will be a meeting which will be held by the MEA officials and the minister. There were also junior ministers, MOS, Foreign Affairs, who were also present out there, who were present in the meeting to chart the future course of action. And I believe this statement is in pursuit of that future course of action. MEA really revealing the first-hand details that the family has really given out as far as that meeting was concerned. Quite a bit of humiliating approach of the Pakistani officials to not return the shoes of the wife as she was wearing it, and also not letting in the
There's a bit of a connectivity problem, but the fact of the matter is that the meeting took place, and what we see is that there is an additional wall separating JP Singh, the Deputy Commissioner, India's Deputy Commissioner in Pakistan, and from there, which means that he was not able to listen in. But let us play that bite of the Indian spokesperson once again. Play that bite of the Indian spokesperson once again, so that we have an idea as to how the Indians have elucidated their point of view.
As you are all aware, The mother and wife of Shri Kulbhushan Jadhav met him yesterday in Islamabad. The meeting took place after requests by India for family access. Prior to the meeting, the two governments were in touch through diplomatic channels to work out its modalities and format. There were clear understandings between the two sides, and the Indian side scrupulously abided by all its commitments. However, we note with regret that the Pakistani side conducted this meeting in a manner which violated the letter and spirit of our understandings. This included the Pakistani press was allowed on multiple occasions to approach family members closely, harass and hector them, and hurt false and motivated accusations about Sri Jadhav. This was despite a clear agreement that the media would not be allowed close access. Under the pretext of security precautions, the cultural and religious sensibilities of family members were disregarded. This included removal of Mangal Sutra, bangles and bindi, as well as a change in attire that was not warranted by security. The mother of Sri Jadhav was prevented from talking in their mother tongue, although this was clearly the natural medium of communication. She was repeatedly interrupted while doing so and eventually prevented from proceeding further in this regard. Deputy High Commissioner was initially separated from family members who were taken to the meeting without informing him. The meeting was started without his presence, and he could join only after pressing the matter with concerned officials. Even then, he was kept behind an additional partition that did not allow him access to the meeting as agreed. For some inexplicable reason, despite her repeated requests, the shoes of the wife of Sri Jadhav were not returned to her after the meeting. We would caution against any mischievous intent in this regard. From the feedback we have received of the meeting, it appears that Sri Jadhav was under considerable stress and is speaking in an atmosphere of coercion. Most of his remarks were clearly tutored and designed to perpetuate the false narrative of his alleged activities in Pakistan. His appearance also raises questions of his health and well-being. We also regret that, contrary to assurances, the overall atmosphere of the meeting was intimidating insofar as family members were concerned. Family members, however, handled the situation with great courage and fortitude. The manner in which the meeting was conducted and its aftermath was clearly an attempt to bolster a false and unsubstantiated narrative of Sri Jadhav's alleged activities. You would all agree that this exercise lacked any credibility.
And I'm also joined by my colleague Taha Siddiqui from Islamabad and also defense expert Mr. Qadian. Before I come to Mr. Raj Qadian, first to you, Taha, your take on the issues raised by the Indian Foreign Ministry.
Well, I think definitely we did yesterday when we were reporting the incident, we did talk about how there were these issues with regards to especially access to the media and the way the media behaved with the family. Other than that, later in the day, we also found out about the fact that the clothes and the attire was changed, and then there was also some of the things that were taken away from them. The Foreign Office sources here had yesterday said that it was because because of security concerns they had to do this, but they did not really specify what security concerns meant when it comes to changing of the attire or washing of the makeup or taking away some of the attire or the dress, the shoes that they were wearing. Also, at the same time, if you remember when you saw the visuals that came out from yesterday when J.P. Singh, the Deputy High Commissioner, came out, he was clearly upset and disappointed at the way the Foreign Office purposely managed the situation.
I think there's a bit of a connectivity issue with Taha. We'll come back to Mr. Qadian. A press conference by the Indian Foreign Affairs spokesperson, and he clearly said that the cultural and religious sensibilities were not taken into account. The Mangal Sutra, bindi, and everything, they were taken off. New dress were given. The shoes was not returned. What do we make of it?
So far, we were aware as public only of what was visible of that meeting. That, in any case, was bad enough. It clearly showed that Pakistan was just meeting a legal obligation so that they can tell the Hague people that they did everything possible on the humanitarian ground. But what is revealed now, that the lady was even asked to remove her bindi, her bengal and Mangal Sutra. It is not only undiplomatic on the part of Pakistan, it's downright uncouth and rude. They should know the significance of Mangal Sutra for a married lady. Apart from this, it is also revealed, as per the mother says, that Kulbhushan was under mental stress. It was something expected, but Pakistan perhaps didn't want it to be visible. That was one reason perhaps they had the glass partition. There could have been no possible security risk if the family was allowed to meet him, but this was the risk, that they will actually know the truth. So Pakistan needs to be taken to task by the government of India. Government of India should spare no efforts in exposing Pakistan and making sure that Kulbhushan is not harmed. It is downright uncouth on the part of Pakistan to ask a married lady to do all this.
Okay, so you stay with me. You stay with me. I'm also joined by Arun Singh, former envoy to US, who joins us on the phone. Mr. Singh, there are certain things which were not in the line, but certain things were also very unexpected. For example, when JP Singh was standing inside, suddenly the women disappeared for a security checkup, and he came to realize only at the fact of it that the meeting was taking place, and he had to barge inside that room, and it was found out that there was a second cordon which was there with him, which means that there was a glass wall between him and where the family of Jadhav was having a conversation with Kulbhushan.
So I think clearly what Pakistan intended, what people were commenting yesterday, and from whatever has come out since then, is clear that it was essentially, from their point of view, a PR exercise aimed at in some way influencing the discussions taking place in the context of the International Court of Justice at The Hague. Now, even while attempting this PR exercise and claiming it to be done on humanitarian grounds, they didn't really show sensitivity to humanitarian concerns, emotions of the family members. And as we saw yesterday, there were several aspects, aside from all that you have described, that in the room where mother and wife were sitting, there was an official of the Pakistan Foreign Office sitting there, but the official of the Indian High Commission was not allowed to go there. And so questions were legitimately raised, whether it was all part of an attempt to get a pre-scripted conversation going, which then they would try and use for propaganda purposes. And therefore, if the official of the Indian High Commission were present and the conversation did not follow a pre-scripted pattern, then it would have been very embarrassing for them. And so, and despite being really, as they said, a humanitarian gesture, why then generate all this publicity around pre-recorded videos, trying to put out forced confessions? And forced confessions of this nature have really no value. I mean, we all saw this recent example of a prime minister of a country going to another and announcing his resignation there, and once he's leaving from that country, going back on that. So this kind of, PR attempt, propaganda, using forced confessions, and then generating everything in the framework of really an adversarial setting. Because if you look at it, it was not a welcoming setting for the family members who were going for an emotional encounter.
Absolutely.
It was an adversarial setting. So I think Pakistan's whole purpose was somehow to maintain its myth, maintain the myth of what it has been propagating, as if this person has been involved in terrorism. Because, Pakistan has been under pressure globally for its involvement with terrorism.
Mr. Singh, just hold your thought for a minute. I'm also joined by Professor Swaran Singh, defense analyst. Mr. Singh, when you look at when you go into the details of the meeting, even if I say leave aside the religious or the cultural issues, they didn't even return the shoes of Kulbhushan Jadhav's wife, and they were taken away by the authorities.
I heard Ambassador Arun Singh say that Pakistan did it perhaps only as a PR exercise. I think in that sense it was a complete disaster for Pakistan, the clumsy way of organizing such an interaction and then letting it to be aired on television when you can see Indian envoy sitting behind another glass ceiling and mother and wife being told to change everything, remove their Mangal Sutra, etc., which is a bad omen for a wife to meet her husband in that manner. And Pakistanis cannot claim that they were not aware of Indian culture and what it means in terms of sensitivities of families and people on both sides. So for me, it's not just condemnable, it is, I think, a disaster the way Pakistan has organized it, and it is perfectly in order that the Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs should really let the world know what they have actually done. It's actually counterproductive for Pakistan, and we need to ensure that world knows that it has caused more hurt and more harm than the meeting being disallowed completely. They could have easily done everything, without allowing any videography of the whole event.
Okay.
But I think we need to really showcase this, that it's an intentional hurt to India. It's intentional hurt to Indian people. And it's not something which can be, seen as...
I just hold your thought, Professor Swaran Singh, for a minute. I'm also joined by a former DGP of Uttar Pradesh, Vikram Singh. Sir, I want to ask you a technical question. These sort of interactions takes place, partition, they're part, the prisons also must be having similar facilities for ensuring interaction between prison inmates and the families who meet. But what about this issue, taking off the Mangal Sutra, even the bindi, not returning the shoes? Why did that take place? Were they suspecting that there were bugging devices inside Mangal Sutra or a bindi?
This is extremely unfortunate and unpardonable. And I fail to understand that Pakistanis should be aware of what the Indian sensitivities are. It was insensitive, it was callous, it was brazen. And I, as an Indian, not only as a professional police officer, would say, I fault the Pakistanis for doing what they did. Now we should fault them for, number one, changing the attire of Mr. Jadhav's mother and Mrs. Jadhav. 2, not returning the shoes. 3, allowing the Pakistani press to heckle the ladies. 4, not allowing the Deputy High Commissioner to be a part of the interaction, and then he being in another compartment, the ladies being in another compartment, and then a badly battered and bruised Mr. Jadhav is speaking to his family. I think it was more of a PR exercise to satisfy the requirement of the International Court of Justice and tell the world that yes, we have allowed the family access as also the consular access. The fact remains, it was neither a consular access, it was neither a family access, it was an exercise, it was a sham. And if there's any example of a worse case, I do not recall a worse case of family interaction and consular access than this one.
Thank you, Mr. Vikram Singh, for joining us on the phone line. But going back to Taha from Islamabad, Taha, when this date was announced, people thought that it's a step forward. There were a lot of hope. After this, there is not even a hope for the next meeting. Taha. I think my colleague Taha is not there. Coming back to our senior foreign policy expert and foreign affairs officer, Mr. Arun Singh. Sir, I know I interrupted you. You were trying to make a point, but this is the question which I really want to ask you, sir, that even the little courtesies were denied and the press was kept at such close proximity. And the visuals were pretty much visible yesterday that JP Singh was getting agitated. And some of the most offensive questions were thrown at Jadhav's mother.
So, although, as I was mentioning, although Pakistan claimed that it was doing this gesture for humanitarian reasons, it was clear from the way it turned out that they were trying to serve their own purposes. One, as you mentioned earlier, was a purpose aimed at the International Court of Justice. And second was something aimed at their own domestic constituency. And it was keeping their own domestic constituency in mind that they allowed the press to be there in such large numbers, to be aggressive in their questioning, to hurl provocative questions at the ladies, even though they had been told well in advance that there would be no question precautions taken and that the no media interaction for the family members who were visiting. So clearly, their aim was to try and sustain domestically and otherwise the false narrative that they tried to create, as if Kulbhushan Jadhav was involved with terrorism, as if India was involved in sending him there, in doing certain kind of activity. And the whole reason is that, as you know, Pakistan has been under pressure globally because of its involvement with terrorism, because of the safe havens it provides to terrorist groups. And one of its strategies to deflect that pressure is to try and create a false narrative as if India has been doing something similar. Now, there are no takers for this, but they clearly persist with this attempt. And the manner in which they structured this interaction of family members, despite claims of it being a humanitarian gesture, it can be seen that the whole exercise is aimed at trying to sustain Pakistan's false PR narrative, both in the international and domestic context.
Mr. Singh,
and it should really be seen for what it is.
Mr. Singh, stay with me. I'm also joined by Sushant Sareen with me. Thank you, Sushant, for joining us. You know, one part of this meeting yesterday was press conference, which was pure PR stunt. But the other details which have just come out is about the plain and simple harassment, you know, taking off a Mangal Sutra, bindi, not returning the slipper. What was the intent of harassing a 70-year-old woman inside that makeshift meeting room with Jadhav's wife?
I think the only rational explanation for this kind of despicable behavior by the Pakistanis was essentially to humiliate the family members, to intimidate them, to torture them mentally. There could not have been any other reason for this kind of low behavior, although we should have expected it coming as it is from the Pakistanis. They are capable of precisely this kind of behavior. Although many would have suspected that maybe the Pakistanis will not fall this low. But really, you know, the images which we saw yesterday were bad enough. They didn't, you know, do anything for having any kind of goodwill towards the Pakistanis for what they claim was a humanitarian gesture, but which was clearly, you know, something which they did according to the Pakistani foreign minister, because they thought it will impress the ICJ and because they thought that they'll flog this incident in front of the Court of International Public Opinion, which nobody was interested in anyways. So they shot themselves in the foot out there. But I think they've also added to the bitterness which already exists in India-Pakistan relations by this kind of absolutely third-rate behavior. And it could not have served any purpose, really. You know, so the only thing is bloody-mindedness, you know, the kind of low behavior which, you know, the most third-rate person would do to humiliate an adversary, enemy, or what have you. I can't think of any other rational explanation for them behaving the way they did.
Thank you, Mr. Sareen, for joining me. I'm also joined by Professor M.D. Nalapat. Professor, what do you make of it?
Well, I'd like to say the only crime Kulbhushan Jadhav, his mother and his wife have committed is that they are Indian nationals. They are proud nationals of India and proud of their Indian passports. Now, very frankly, the deep state in Pakistan has done this in full view of a global audience, basically to send a message that we don't care about India. We don't care what, you know, we don't believe you can do anything. And they're going to insult and humiliate your people. They're going to insult and humiliate your citizens, catch them, and put them through any kind of shameful kind of experience, because we just don't care for you. So very frankly, one more very well written, in excellent language protest from the MEA or from anybody else is not going to make any difference. The reality of the situation is, this is the Pakistan military, this is the Pakistan deep state saying, we don't care a fig about India, and we don't believe India can do anything against us while we continue to humiliate and harass people for the quote-unquote crime of being citizens of India. This is a lady of 70. This is a wife whose husband is on death row. And the way they have been treated, very frankly, it is a humiliating thing. Of course, it's a reflection of the deep state of Pakistan, but we know that. I remember 15 years ago, the Kartikeya,
yes,
when the Pakistanis disemboweled and did some terrible things to an Indian soldier. I was very particular that we should show those images. But at that time itself, oh no, please don't do that. We can't do that. The family will not like it. And the reality is, we always cover up for Pakistan. We don't show their ugliness. Now they have shown their own ugliness. I can tell you, if we were handling the video, we probably would not have done it. We would not have shown it.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat. Thank you, Professor Swaran Singh, and thank you, Arun Singh, for joining me on this show.